Today on Straight Talk Africa, we talk about U.S.-African relations with the rising star in the U.S. House of Representatives, Congresswoman Karen Bass. She is the ranking Democrat on the House Subcommittee on Africa and has recently traveled to several African countries, including Mali, South Africa, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That's coming up next right here on Straight Talk Africa. Hello, welcome to Straight Talk Africa. It's Wednesday, April 10th. I am Shaka Soli.
And hello, I'm Mariama Diallo, your social media reporter.
Today, we'll discuss strengthening ties between the United States and Africa under U.S. budget cuts, also known as the sequestration.
And coming up later in our STA inbox, you, our audience, have weighed in our topic through your emails and Facebook comments. And we'll reveal some of them ahead on Straight Talk Africa.
But first, the mandatory U.S. federal budget cuts that recently went into effect, known as sequestration, are affecting more than the government's domestic programs. The $85 billion of across-the-board cuts are also undercutting international aid and development efforts. Despite the challenges and the rhetoric, many feel the future of international aid is still optimistic. My colleague Emmy Katz has more.
Like other federal agencies, the U.S. Agency for International Development has to cut its budget as a result of sequestration. The 4% USAID must cut will reduce its foreign assistance, but many ongoing projects will not be affected immediately since USAID provides funding up to 2 years in advance. Even if the budget cuts for USAID and other U.S. aid and development programs remain small, they will affect the health and lives of real people, says George Ingram of the Brookings Institution.
The area that will be impacted the most is health. And that's because that's the biggest part of the development budget. And the second is humanitarian assistance, which will be cut about $200 million. Those are very serious hits because both of those accounts, we're talking about life and death situations.
Raj Kumar is president of DevEx, an organization that researches and reports on international aid. He thinks that people with HIV/AIDS might suffer the most.
We're in a world with 30 million people living with HIV, for example. Many of them now around the world are dependent on U.S. foreign assistance.
One bright spot in the aid picture is the increasing role of private philanthropies like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And corporations are also becoming involved in development in communities where they do business and want people to be able to afford their products. Still, these efforts cannot close the entire gap in aid provided by the U.S. government, especially in the area of health and disaster assistance.
The private sector is not going to step in and provide the medical care, the food, the water that is required when you have a humanitarian crisis.
While many Americans criticize foreign aid, the public actually supports many of its goals.
The American people are very supportive of helping other countries and people with their health problems, with education, with microenterprise, with promoting democracy, with promoting economic growth. Americans don't like foreign aid, but they seem to support all of the elements of it.
And while foreign aid is a popular punching bag in political debates, it actually accounts for no more than 1% of the entire U.S. budget. For producer Tatiana Vorozhko, Amy Katz, VOA News.
Thanks, Emmy Katz, for that report. Meanwhile, the U.S. Congress is made up of 535 members, 100 senators, 2 from each state, and 435 members in the House of Representatives. My colleague Paul Cisco has more on one of those who is making a difference on Capitol Hill for U.S.-Africa relations.
My name is Karen Bass. I'm a member of Congress from Los Angeles, and I'm the ranking member or the lead Democrat from the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa.
Representative Karen Bass is serving her second term in Congress. She's on the House Judiciary Committee and on the African Subcommittee She has high hopes for the continent.
What I hope to accomplish in the next couple of years is the reauthorization of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, because it is my focus to focus on trade, to focus on the economies, for the United States to recognize that 7 out of 10 of the world's fastest growing economies are on the continent. So reauthorization of AGOA, as well as a change in the perception of the United States about the continent, so that we no longer look at the continent as one either natural or man-made disaster after another, and recognize that the continent is a land of opportunity. Africa is rising, and the United States needs to step up and not be behind.
She recently traveled to Africa on a fact-finding mission to Mali, South Africa, and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
We went from 2 situations that are very difficult, but I believe hopeful, to South Africa with its booming economy.
France has indicated it will begin withdrawing its troops from Mali by the end of the month, but a large force is now moving against a suspected Islamist militant base in the north near Gao.
The most important thing that can happen in Mali are the elections in July, a stable government, and addressing some of the root causes that led to the problem to begin with, which is the social and economic conditions of the country.
Representative Bass says she sees Mali and the Congo much the same way.
When you have a population that does not see a future, that is hopeless, that does not see any way for legitimate employment, then they turn to crime. And so when I look at M23 or when I look at some of the rebel forces in northern Mali, I think that until you address those social and economic conditions, you're going to constantly face this type of instability. And so looking at the Congo, you're talking about one of the richest countries on the earth in terms of its resources. And what a tragedy it is that after so many years, they've not been able to take those resources and utilize them to the benefit of the population. So it's my hope for both the Congo and Mali that they will be able to take the resources that are already there and use them for the benefit of the masses of the people and not just for a small sector.
Last week, she shared her concerns for the health and welfare of women in Africa with the First Ladies of Guinea, Mali, Mozambique, Niger, and others at the second African First Ladies Health Summit in her home district in California. Finally, Representative Karen Bass says she expects President Obama will dramatically raise the profile of U.S. involvement on the continent over the next 3 years. Paul Cisco, VOA News.
Thanks, Paul, for that interesting report. Now joining us here in our Washington studios are 2 distinguished guests. Congresswoman Karen Bass, who serves in the U.S. House of Representatives for the U.S. state of California's 37th Congressional District. Ms. Bass serves as the ranking Democrat of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights. And Dr. Julius Agba, Africa Research Fellow for Global Economy and Development and Africa Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institution, a think tank based here in Washington, D.C. I have to say honestly that I am profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the 2 of you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
You're most welcome. Later in the program, we'll give you, the audience, a chance to call and talk with our guests. The number to call is 202-619-3111. The US country code is 1. I'm really glad, Karen, especially for you, finally making it on Straight Talk Africa, because frankly, we've been chasing you since last year.
Exactly.
You're most welcome.
Exactly, and I think each time we were in the middle of voting in Congress and I wasn't able to come over, so
That
I'm
is
glad
correct.
to be here today.
And I suppose congratulations are really in order for your re-election.
Yes. Yes,
Well,
thank you.
you just came back from Africa. Briefly, what was your experience?
Well, it was a wonderful trip. I wished it had been a lot longer. We spend sometimes just a little time in a country, and so I definitely wished for more. But it was exciting to go to South Africa for the first time. As I mentioned to you before,
Yes.
having worked in the anti-apartheid struggle in Los Angeles, and having never been to South Africa, it was wonderful to go and to see the development and the advancements that have been made since apartheid fell.
How did it feel like when the plane touched down at Oliver Tambo International Airport?
Exactly. Well, you know what? I mean, it's interesting you say that, because one of the last activities I did in the anti-apartheid movement was we put on a big, huge celebration for the 75th anniversary of the ANC, and Oliver Tambo was there as our special guest in Los Angeles. So to land in the Oliver Tambo airport was quite amazing.
He used, of course, to be the key food sourager for the ANC those days.
Absolutely.
Interesting. What about you, Julius? What do you think about Africa-US relations so far? You've been here for quite some time. I realize that you spent quite some time too in South Africa.
Definitely, yeah. I spent about 5 years over in South Africa.
Going to school and teaching?
Studying and working in South Africa, yeah. So my general impression, thank you first of all for inviting me to this very distinguished and well watched program across Africa. My impressions about US-Africa relationship is that they are good and they are going in the right direction. And Africa needs more of trade than aid. And we're happy that the US understands that and is wanting to promote that, to go in that direction. So my impressions are positive, that both parties understand what needs to be done and they are thinking in the right direction.
Very interesting. Well, I will come back to you, Karen. During the 2008 presidential campaign, of which, of course, you had the honor and the privilege of being the California co-chair of making sure that candidate Barack Obama becomes president.
Exactly.
Which you did. Then candidate Barack Obama talked about his desire to bring about trajectory change in the way the U.S. government serves its citizens. How has he fared so far, in your view, since becoming President Barack Obama?
Right. Well, it's a wonderful question, and I actually think that the accomplishments of the first Obama administration is something that isn't widely known. But I do have to say that when President Obama took office in 2009, it was the worst economic crisis that we'd had since the Great Depression. And then, you know, just all of the hostility directed toward President Obama by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, my Republican colleagues, who said on day one that their #1 goal was to make sure he did not win re-election. And so in the face of all of that, increasing assistance to USAID, Feed the Future, a number of programs that were started, the leadership of young Africans that he's essentially taken under his wing in a mentor program. I think there have been a lot of accomplishments in this administration, but they haven't been well publicized. But having said that, I look forward to this term, and I look forward to him visiting the continent.
Julius, what about you? From a vantage point, what do you think about President Barack Obama's tenure in the White House? And,
so generally, political scientists think that a president has more leverage to do, the United States president has more leverage to do the things that are hard usually in the second term. And I would think that it was a very wise decision from President Obama to keep his secrets for the second term. So all of Africa is looking optimistically to see what he has in his bag that he has been hiding over the last 4 years. And hopefully that should be more development assistance to help Africa get to the threshold where it can kick off.
I see.
It can emerge.
Well, before we pause for a short break, we would like to remind you that Straight Talk Africa is on the social networking website, Facebook. Just enter the keyword Straight Talk Africa, become a fan, and connect with other friends of the Voice of America. We'll be right back with you, so please don't go away.
When it comes to the career highlights of Congresswoman Karen Bass, she was the first African-American woman elected as Speaker of the California State Legislature. During her first term, Congresswoman Bass united legislators, advocacy groups, and international leaders to extend the Third Country Fabric provision of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. The provision supports stability, development, and economic growth of sub-Saharan African countries by protecting jobs in the apparel sector and providing some of the best markets for American businesses to sell their goods and services. Now in her second term, Congresswoman Bass is diligently working to solidify America's relationship with Africa.
Hi, this is Lenore Mudu from VOA's Africa Health Network. We're having a media contest and we want you to participate. Our theme is Health in Your Community. Send us photographs, drawings, videos, songs, or poems to show how health is being addressed in your community. Numerous prizes will be awarded. Full contest rules and information will be on the website. You can also upload your entries there, africahealthnetwork.com. Email them to africahealthnetwork@voanews.com or mail them. Lenore Mudu, VOA's Africa Health Network, 330 Independence Avenue Southwest, room 1613, Washington, D.C. 20237, USA. Please include your name, country, 1 or 2 sentences about your entry, and other contact details. I hope to hear from you. Thanks.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. What is your opinion about today's topic? Call us at 202-619-3111. The U.S. country code is 1. When you call, please remember the following. Keep your question or comment brief and turn down the volume on your television or radio. Now let's return to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther, and welcome back. Just a reminder, for more details on how to enter VOA's Africa Health Network contest, check out their website at africahealthnetwork.com. Now, before the break, of course, we were talking about how Africans, perceive Obama. A man, of course, they claim to be one of their own.
That's right.
Especially because not only is he a black man, but his father comes from Kogero.
That's right.
In Western Kenya.
That's right.
In Nyanza. What about your perceptions, really, as an African, and perhaps those you have shared with some of your colleagues, in terms of his performance, in terms of the manner in which he has tried or not tried to relate to his mother continent?
I think that was a very difficult one for the president, given the kind of civil society that you have in the United States, which they are very picky, watching on everything, every step you make. So I think the president has been very wise and cautious in his movements. You realize that during his first term, he visited a couple of countries in Africa, and Kenya was not one of them. It's not by accident. It was a careful choice, both to send a message that, look here, I'm first of all an American. Mm-hmm. I'm first of all an American before being Kenyan at some stage. Mm-hmm. And secondly, Kenya was not sending the right message. The message from Kenya was not the one to be upheld in Washington. Mm-hmm. You know what happened in 2007. And so I thought the president was very cautious in that direction. So what will need to be seen is how is he going to behave in this second term now that Kenya has upheld the status of a democracy, a functional democracy. I predict that chances are that he might step his feet in Kenya to...
Julius, you seem to talk frankly like a researcher at the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C. But put yourself in the feet of an ordinary Cameroonian, for example,
That's right.
where you come from,
Yeah.
or an ordinary Kenyan,
That's right.
or South African.
Yeah.
What do they really think about Obama? What do they really say?
Well, they would have many high expectations. I, for one, was also one of those who had very high hopes when President Obama was elected as President of the United States. And so the feeling, the aspirations of the ordinary African is very high. But the question is whether those are actually well-calculated aspirations, The United States is a country which has its own objectives, its goals, and its mandates, and its growth by laws and principles. So President Obama, no matter, even if both of his parents were African, there's not much he can do, given that the United States has a well-constituted manner in which power functions. So he has accepted to be an American, and he has to behave the way Americans do.
But Karen, what about those who have even tried to compare him with his predecessors? They have said, look, George W. Bush, a man probably that was resented in the Middle East and a lot of places around the world, but when it comes to Africa, they say the man is George Bush. And then, of course, Bill Clinton, a man who some here at one time called the first black American president.
Well, let me say a few things. First of all, when it comes to President Bush did wonderful work, especially in establishing PEPFAR.
Right.
But as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and as a relatively new member of Congress, what I have learned is that what led to President Bush taking up PEPFAR was the advocacy and pressure from the Congressional Black Caucus. I think in terms of President Obama, one thing that people on the continent, and I'm sure that they know in general, but should know specifically, President Obama was under attack from day one. As I mentioned before, when the Republicans said their #1 goal was to make sure he didn't win the presidency, if you recall, the first couple of years of his presidency, there were groups around the United States that were questioning whether he was born here, whether he was actually a Kenyan.
They claimed, in fact, that he was born in Mombasa.
Well, because they could not handle the fact, in my opinion, that there was an African American in the White House. The number of threats against his life have been unprecedented. And so I think that many of us, not just on the continent, but here in the United States, among African Americans, were so excited to see him win the presidency. But I think, frankly, we had some unrealistic expectations as to what he could accomplish in the context of one of the worst economic crises in our history, and in addition to accomplish with the attacks that he had, that he faced, especially in his 3rd and 4th year of his presidency.
Given the threats from his political adversaries, especially the Republican Party, as you put it, whose agenda was to make sure that he is not re-elected. What happened? Because the last time I checked, he still occupies 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. What exactly did you guys do?
Well, then let me just tell you, I think that the Republican Party is completely out of step with the U.S. public, which is why he was elected across the board without question. And I frankly think that some of my colleagues in the Republican Party are now confused, because their first objective was to make sure he wasn't elected. Their second objective was to make sure he failed during the time he was president. And so now he's president again. And I think what you have seen from the Congress since he was sworn in again in January is confusion. You started off the show by talking about the sequestration. And so we're all very much concerned about that, and perhaps we'll talk about it a little later. But I think it's really important for people to understand the amount of opposition that has been directed toward him. Unprecedented.
You are a friend of President Obama. You work with him very, very closely. Does he plan, for example, to go to Africa sooner rather than later, or what does he really have in store for the African continent?
Well, I can tell you that I do not know his travel schedule, but I do believe that he will touch down on the continent before the year is out. That is my opinion. But I think in terms of what he has planned for the continent, the president did release a strategy around Africa last year. And again, I think it was one of those accomplishments that wasn't well publicized. But he absolutely talked about, as you did, the focus is on trade now, not aid, and recognizing that 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies are taking place on the continent of Africa. And so, as I always say, it's very important that we educate the U.S. population about the continent of Africa and change the perception of how we view the continent.
Now, Julius, in his first term, he obviously went to Egypt. And then later, in fact, I was with him in Ghana, in Accra.
That's right.
Oh, you were there?
Yes. If you had an opportunity perhaps to suggest to him, in case he planned to go to Africa, where would you like him to go and why?
Very good question. So, from experience, it seems that the president's strategy is trying to give incentives, support the countries that have shown a track record of performance in good governance and empowering their citizens. So in that light, I would think the president would want to put Senegal on his list. He wants to put Kenya on his list. But I also want to say that it's important also to go to those places where things are not working and talk to the people that are there. I mean, if somebody's not making it, is not succeeding in what he needs to do, perhaps he has a challenge that could be addressed. It could be helped. So I would suggest the president to also include some countries, the underperformers, some underperformers.
For example?
Cameroon.
Paul Biya.
Yes.
What would he talk to Paul Biya about?
It would be very important if he goes to Cameroon and
Yes.
he has a conversation with the president of Cameroon and tries to tell him that in about 3 years he will no longer be the president of the United States, and tell him how he plans to live his life after the presidency of the United States and how it is important to live the life after presidency, after you are president. Maybe he could change his mind and also accept to leave power. So I think that evil prevails when good people do nothing. The president should take a bold attempt and face those dictators, those countries that are not doing the right thing, and speak to them. And I think I remember a conversation about a former British Prime Minister who visited an African country on the eve of the presidential election results. And the aim he went there was to console the incumbent if he lost. So he spent some time. And his presence on the territory helped the president to concede defeat when the election results were announced.
Are you talking about Zambia and Kenneth Kaunda?
Yes, that's right.
That is Jimmy Carter.
Yeah. So those are the kind of things the president could do. Go to those places that things are not working. Don't ignore them. The more you ignore them, the more they become solidified in the wrong that they are doing. So I think I would want to see more approach towards Zambia, towards Zimbabwe, more approach towards Congo, towards the Cameroons. And I honestly believe that there would be a strong change. Something good is going to come out of such visits.
But how would you persuade some of these rulers, in fact, some prefer to call them rulers rather than leaders, who some have frankly characterized as people who have a pathological fear of fair competition?
Definitely. And I don't know how those kind of leaders manage to come to power in the first place, because a leader by definition, and you've said there are many who are rulers but not leaders, a leader should be somebody who knows his post-leadership agenda. If you don't know your post-leadership agenda, you are in the wrong place. You are not a leader, because you move by events. You will be led by events. So leaders should have already a post-leadership agenda. So if you want to be president, tell us first of all what you do when you are no more president. That will be more convincing.
Let's go to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers. Good evening, Okolo from Nigeria. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Good evening, Mr. Shaka. Good evening, our guests in the studio.
I am hugely terrific. How are you today?
Mr. Shaka, so. You see, Mr. Shaka, I'm so impressed with this topic you are treating tonight, in the sense that this American cutting of African budget is a welcome development to me as a Nigerian. Now look at the situation in African continent. The budget, a country will come now and say that this is an annual budget. Ministry of Disaster and Management Commission, you have social budget. Ministry of Health, you have social budget. When such thing happened, what happened? The people at the hierarchy of their affairs, the management level, will do but don't share that money, because they have hope that foreign countries will be sending aid to the country. Because of that, they will standard the money which the country have already budgeted. So by the time America will reduce, or if possible, stop sending aid to Africa. African continent is really an independent country. The word I put on quote independent. What is independent? You as an individual should take care of yourself, take care of your country, make sure that this is what we call equity. But here in Africa, it doesn't happen. So the area American government move and make sure that budget cuts are being implemented in African countries, it will help us. Now look at what it like what my brother was talking about, Cameroon, Kenya, and Senegal, where our brother will be visiting. That is because the country are moving.
Could you please hold it, Okolo? Hold it, Okolo. We'll come back to you later, because time happens not to be our best ally. You're tuned into Straight Talk Africa. We'll have more on our discussion in a moment. But first, here is Mariama Diaro. Mariama.
Thanks, Shaka. Still to come, we'll reveal some of the fantastic feedback we've received from you, our audience, through social media. But now, here is our letter of the week from a Straight Talk Africa Facebook fan in Accra, all the way from the West African country of Ghana, who responded to our question of the week.
Our letter of the week comes from Matt Willis Adotete from Accra in Ghana, who says, "How long will Africa depend on foreign aid? This is the genesis of foreign manipulation driving Africa's economy in the direction they think it should go to suit their own interests. I believe Africa can be self-sufficient with its own rich natural resources, and I think no country can stand anywhere near Africa."
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
This is Straight Talk Africa on the Voice of America. Call us now with your questions and comments. The number 202-619-3111 and the U.S. country code is 1. Call us collect and we'll pay for the call, or call direct and we'll call you right back. Remember to keep your questions brief. Now back to Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you very much, Esther, and welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, live from Washington. Once again, it's time to bring in my colleague and social media reporter, Mariama Diaro. Mariama, take it away, Mariama.
Well, thanks, Shaka. AGOA and other initiatives may be impacted by automatic across-the-board cuts to all discretionary spending in the U.S. federal budget. The cuts, also known as the sequester, started in March. Top officials at the International Monetary Fund have implied that the sequester would potentially affect African economies directly through reduced foreign aid and indirectly through lower export receipts, remittances, and foreign investment should there be a significant slowdown in the U.S. economy. Our question of the week asked, how do you think African governments should respond to the impact of the budget cuts from the U.S. sequester? Thanks for using all our social media platforms to communicate to us. Let's begin with a comment from Klaus Kwalongo, a human resources admin at the University of Dodoma in Tanzania. He says, African governments should do 3 things. And number 1 would be raise tax collections to increase domestic revenues to supplement dependence from donors. Number 2, substitute U.S. donations with grants from other fast-growing countries like Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa. And finally, number 3, encourage domestic investors and macro producers to increase the GDP so products can be sold abroad. And GDP, basically, they mean the gross domestic product of a country. We're going to move on to another comment that comes from Christian Twagira from Kigali in Rwanda, who says, in a briefly worded response to our question, basically, that Africa can sustain itself. Shaka, brief and to the point, but the first one had great suggestions. What do you think?
I think that the suggestions are right on the money, Mariama, because let's face it, ever since I was a little kid, and we're talking about when African countries began gaining their or regaining their political independence, leaders there or rulers have been talking about how Africa produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. You can't keep talking the talk. It is time to walk the talk, Mariama.
Well, you're absolutely right. We actually have some more feedback. So let's move on to a posting from Stephen Dakalira, let me get it right, in Blantyre in Malawi, who writes, it's about time that Africa graduated from being dependent on aid to independent. We are blessed with skills and resources. Now it's time to look within ourselves and see what will work for us. And finally, Abu Bello, a fan from Lusaka in Zambia, says, I think Africa can survive without the aid of the U.S. It depends on how we will use our natural resources. Shaka, again, a lot of talk about changing management style this time. We have the natural resources, but basically we just need to manage it better. And if we do, maybe we won't even need foreign aid. Do you think that can actually ever happen, Shaka?
Well, why not? Of course, you know, society, of course, is not static, it is dynamic. What do you think, Karen?
Well, I think that that's absolutely the future. However, right now, I'm going to fight very hard in Congress to end the sequestration because, frankly, there is no reason for these across-the-board budget cuts. This is an ideological battle that is taking place in the United States over what type of government we want to have. And there are people in Congress who really don't believe that we should be involved in foreign affairs at all. As a matter of fact, we have a joke in Congress about how much the U.S. budget is actually dedicated to foreign aid. It's really only 1%, but there is the perception that it's 20%, 30%, or 40%. So while Africa struggles to be independent economically, I'm going to continue to struggle here for U.S. to continue aid, but also increase trade.
What about you, Agba, Julius?
Yeah, I think most of the audience has raised many great points about how Africa needs to be independent in terms of managing its resources well, better, because there are many African countries who shouldn't be receiving aid. It's really ridiculous for countries which are so highly blessed with mineral resources.
But who does this aid benefit really? Because a lot of studies have been carried out, including your own think tank. They don't seem, frankly, to benefit the ordinary African.
Definitely, that's right. So the first generation of aid administration, international aid administration, was not very successful. But we are beginning to see a change, especially from the United States side, where aid has now, there's what we call now smart aid, that is targeted at doing specific things.
I see. We'll come back to that later.
That's right.
Thanks, Mariama, for bringing us this week's audience reaction.
Well, that's all the feedback we have for now. We appreciate all the responses. Please keep them coming. And before I go, just a reminder, we would like to hear from you. So drop us a line at africatv@voanews.com. Once again, our email address is africatv@voanews.com. Or post a comment on our Facebook page. Just enter the keywords Straight Talk Africa. Also, be sure to visit us online at voaafrica.com. Now, let's take a look at what's ahead for next week.
Next week on Straight Talk Africa, South Sudan became an independent nation 2 years ago. Today, after a series of agreements with Sudan, oil production has resumed and is expected to flow soon. But economic development in the new republic is much needed. Still, challenges and opportunities abound. That's next week, right here on Straight Talk Africa.
That was, of course, my colleague Mariama Diallo, a descendant of Othman Don Fodio, the revolutionary reformer that led, of course, the Fulani Great Kingdom in West Africa many, many years ago. Let me come back to Karen. Of course, you heard about all this business about aid, and others are talking about perhaps people being self-sustainers. I mean, they're calling for self-sustainers. They are thinking about how they should be in control of their own resources. The resources have always been there. People talk about the potential. I heard you talk about, for example, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I mean, if you were to do research, there's no question that the Congo problem, frankly, in large part has been the absence of leadership, frankly.
Right, right.
Somebody to mobilize and organize their people.
Well, I will tell you that it was disheartening when I arrived in the Congo, knowing about all of the resources that are there. But on the other hand, I think it would be premature and not very, good on the U.S. part if we said simply because the country has the resources, we should stop all aid. I mean, for example, when I was in South Africa, I visited projects that were receiving PEPFAR funding. And when I was in Uganda, I visited projects that received PEPFAR funding. I've also visited projects that are receiving USAID Feed the Future funding. I want to make sure that the United States, in giving foreign aid, is doing it in the right way, to targeted projects, doesn't have so many strings attached that we're trying to manipulate another government, but at the same time that we're moving toward trade and looking at more bilateral.
If you look at the manner, for example, how the Congo regained its political independence back in 1960, and subsequently you have the assassination of Patrice Emery Lumumba.
Right.
And given all the exposure that you have had to access and all the research that has actually been, produced and distributed around the world, do you feel like the West always has a moral obligation to do something about the DRC? Because after Lumumba, who does the West support? A Mobutu Sese Seko for 32 years.
Well, I absolutely think that, and and as we started, I mean, I was involved in the 70s and 80s in the whole anti-apartheid struggle. Our history on the continent has not always been a great history, and so I think that there's things that we need to rectify, but at the same time, I would never want to tip it in the other direction and say that there's too many problems in Africa, or Africa should be able to sustain itself, so let's cut off U.S. funding. I think both would be irresponsible.
Both would be irresponsible. What about you, Agba Julius? More of the same, or do we need a paradigm shift here, really?
I think we need both. You need aid, you need trade. And there's also the emphasis, as the consensus seems to be going, that Africa should do their job well. They should manage their countries properly. So there comes the requirement for good governance, so that Africans should not be dependent on aid. I think, honestly, that is the lack of competent leadership that deprive the citizens of the right to a better livelihood.
What about the priorities by some of these leaders, really? Because one of my greatest interviews, I have to tell you, in my last 13 years hosting this program, was hosting a former Botswanan president, Festus Mogae. He was president at the time. I remember asking him, by the way, how did you get here? What was your mode of transportation? This was September, coming to the UN General Assembly. He said, I came via commercial aircraft, Shaka. I said, you did what? You come from a very rich country by any measure. I was looking at your website, you have huge, budget reserves and what have you, and yet your colleagues, they run around the world with corporate jets.
That's right.
When their people cannot have 2 meals a day, the children cannot go to school, they cannot even drink clean water.
So President Banda from Malawi sold the
yes,
presidential jets.
Also the Mercedes-Benz limousines.
Right.
She's still a president.
Right.
How do you go about that? The priorities.
That is very clear, and I think it is even biblical. The Bible says that where there is no vision, the people perish. So if you have leadership that doesn't have vision, there's no priorities that are for the people, then the people perish.
Let's go again to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers. Let's go to Duba. Good evening, Duba from Nigeria. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Good evening, Shaka. It's longest time.
I am hugely terrific. How are you today, Oga?
Thank you, sir. We are here in Kaduna. Now, my own question, sir, I wanted to deviate a little bit about the political and rulership we are experiencing in Nigeria to economic status. Now, in terms of bilateral relationship between America and Africa, now, what can you substantiate on ground now, apart from that existing? What can you substantiate as an economic bilateralship between America and Africa? Thank you very much. It has been Buba Umariaza from Kaduna, Nigeria, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really didn't quite get Duba's question, but he's talking about bilateral relations with the United States and Africa. But this brings your point at some point where you argue that for some reason, there are people who tend to think that Africa is a country.
Right, the size of Texas.
Precisely. When in fact you have the United States can fit in Africa three times
right.
and more.
I spend a lot of time saying that.
You do. Well, a reminder that you are tuned into Straight Talk Africa. Today's topic, strengthening ties between the United States and Africa under U.S. budget cuts, also known as the sequestration. If you wish to participate in our discussion, please call us at 202-619-3111. U.S. country code is 1. We'll continue our discussion in a moment, so please don't go away.
So far this year, here is a list of key hearings of the U.S. House Subcommittee on Africa, the Sudan and the South Sudan conflict, assessing China's role and influence in Africa, examining the role of Rwanda in the DRC insurgency, Tuareg revolt and the Mali coup, and finally, increasing American jobs through greater exports to Africa Act.
Report of Prince Haiti, Carolyn
VOA News, Baghdad.
News, London.
Hi, this is Imran Siddiqui from VOA's Urdu TV.
And I'm Alex Villarreal. I'm an English language reporter, and we are going to take you on assignment.
Let's go.
By Iraqi traditions, women are considered the glue that holds society together.
The women were frightened. The men were frightened.
I'm here with VOA's Carolyn Pursuti, who recently went to Haiti.
You know, it was quite a tremendous earthquake. Between these two families, they make 8 different handicrafts.
All of a sudden, the security guy came over to me and then, hey, you are not allowed to shoot anything here.
This is a story about the empowerment of Muslim women in the West.
Got really close to this Taekwondo team that had all Muslim women on the team.
If you like today's show, please write and tell us what you think or give us some suggestions. Be sure to tell us what station you're tuned into. Our address, Straight Talk Africa, Voice of America, 330 Independence Avenue Southwest, Washington, D.C. 20237 USA. Or send us an email at africatv@voanews.com. Log on to our website, voaafrica.com. Or post your comments on Facebook. Keywords Straight Talk Africa.
Oh yeah. Welcome back. If you have just joined us, our distinguished guest, Congresswoman Karen Bass, who serves in the U.S. House of Representatives for the U.S. state of California. Ms. Bass serves as the ranking Democrat of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights. And Dr. Julius Agba, Africa Research Fellow for Global Economy and Development and Africa Growth Initiative at the Brookings Institution, a think tank based here in Washington, D.C. Well, once again, I frankly have to say that I am profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome. There is another caller here. Let's go to Sanusi from Ghana. Good evening, Sanusi. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa. Sanusi, can you hear me? I'm afraid we do have some problem. Let me come you to Karen. First of all, what is sequester? Where did this phrase come from?
Sure. Well, sequestration was a strategy that was used last year when we were fighting over whether or not to raise the debt ceiling, the ability of the U.S. government to borrow money to pay its bills. And so since the Democrats and Republicans couldn't come to terms, this idea was floated that if we put a hammer on ourselves and say if we don't come to a deal by a certain time, then the axe will fall and you'll have to do across-the-board cuts. I frankly never believed it was going to happen, mainly because of my conservative colleagues never wanting to cut the military. But they called all of our bluffs, and they actually did agree to cut defense. And so if we weren't able to come up with a new budget, which we weren't able to do, then sequestration went into effect, which means that there are across-the-board cuts. $85 billion of cuts from March to September of this year. Now, at the same time as we turned that on, we could turn sequestration off at any point in time, which is why some of the cuts that might happen with foreign aid, I am hopeful will not happen to the extent that they are reported. because I don't believe that we will continue sequestration all the way until September.
Are you sure that you are going to continue perhaps having the ability to make your contributions to the United Nations, for example, and other international agencies?
Well, and I will tell you that that comes up for debate every year. That's a hot button item. There's many of my colleagues who don't believe the U.S. should contribute to the United Nations. I do believe we'll continue to make the contribution. It might be cut for a while. I don't think that cut will last until the end of September.
What is the role of the Africa Subcommittee in the Congress?
The role of the subcommittee is to conduct public hearings about various issues related to the continent. And those hearings are informational hearings, but occasionally they are hearings tied to legislation.
How do you, for example, interact and collaborate or work together with the State Department when it comes to foreign aid? I mean, foreign aid, foreign relations and all that kind of stuff.
Well, we interact regularly with the State Department. For example, almost every time we have a hearing in regards to Africa, there is a representative from the State Department there.
Do you influence the manner in which they interact with the African continent?
We want to believe we do. Yes, I think that Congress does influence how the State Department interacts with the continent.
What about this recent controversial statement from former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Ambassador John Carson, when he talked about Kenya before the elections, and he said, choice have consequences?
Well, I think he was making the statement that we were very hopeful that the Kenyan elections, regardless of the outcome, would be peaceful and would be handled in a correct manner.
What about the ICC? The ICC, obviously, as it relates to, for example, now President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and his deputy President William Ruto.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, we're all waiting to see, because I believe the date is coming up soon in which he's supposed to go before the ICC, but I also know that there's some controversy right now in terms of the witnesses that were making accusations as to whether or not they will actually show up.
And when John Carson made that statement, he did it after President Obama had made his own statement, where he had seemed to suggest that the Kenyans have a right to choose their leaders.
Yes, they do.
Would you say that Johnny, in one way or the other, may in fact have contradicted his boss?
I don't believe so, especially knowing Ambassador Carson. I don't believe that that was the intent of his comment. We can't say that we want countries to hold democratic elections, and then when we don't like the outcome, then all of a sudden we don't like the election.
Very interesting. Let's go again to the lifeline of the show, which are the telephone callers. Let's go to Sanusi in Ghana. Good evening, Sanusi. You're most welcome to Straight Talk Africa.
Yeah, good evening, Shaka. How are you?
Hugely terrific. How are you today?
Yeah, not too bad, you know.
Come on, man. You have to be terrific. Why do you have to be not too bad? That is a double negative.
Not too bad, you know. Not too bad. Life is moving. We are still moving, you know.
Okay, man.
Our democracy is quite interesting now, so we are really enjoying the democracy.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So, Chaka, what I have for the American government is, you know, they are doing well, at least in terms of supporting countries, especially Ghana. But there are other problems that some of us, you know, have with them. You see a country that a small minority group will, you know, at least create some tension within that country. And all of a sudden, you see that they are supporting that minority group. At the end of the day, you can see that country turn upside down, you know, children, especially women and children dying. So I want to know from them, are they going to change some other policy to look up to the majority side rather than a few group of people who have their personal interest in? Because it's happening in other countries that we've seen it, like in Libya, Iraq, and others. And especially ours in Ghana, we are always happy that America is giving us the support, especially the George Bush Street, which we are very happy that we have that, you know, fund that we had that very good route, which you can drive now from my end to that place. We can drive no less than 15 minutes, but at first we drive at least an hour.
Thank you.
So we really appreciate what they are doing, but they have to look up to their foreign policy, especially down here in Africa, and support the good governance especially democratic, that we are trying to, to defend. Ours, we are defending democracy actually in Ghana. So we are putting to them to support, the winning candidate, especially everybody outside the observers, like what has happened in Ghana. We don't know the outcome of the Supreme Court. So what is their interest? I just want to know what their interest in our democracy in Ghana.
Thank you very much.
Our election.
Thank you very much, my brother. What about that, Karen? In fact, there is concern on the part of a lot of Africans, by the way, that when American leaders, policymakers talk about how they have this soft part for Africa, they really don't mean the ordinary African. They mean the African political elite who they interact with. What about that?
Well, some people might hold that view. I certainly don't hold that view.
Having come from that front line, you probably don't.
I do not hold that view, and I think that's a view that is wrong.
But do you detect it, for example, among some of your colleagues?
Well, I detect more a lack of understanding than I detect a deliberate attempt to just focus on the elite. And we have our own struggles here in the United States over elections too, so we shouldn't act like everything is rosy here. You saw our elections in November, where people had to wait in line for hours and hours, where there were attempts to block people from voting. So I think while we run around the world and talk about democracy, and I think that's important for us to do, I think we also have to make sure that our own business is taken care of too.
I hear you. What about you? You have the last word. What about those Africans, frankly, who feel that a lot of these Western policymakers end up really interacting with the political elite who themselves have ceased to interact with their own people?
That's right. But I think may not be completely true, because if you look at the way the new aid from the United States is packaged to Africa, it is aimed at identifiable, clear, objective, explicit goals that are quantifiable and measurable.
Through who?
How many?
Civil society or through the government?
Usually, I think it's going through civil society, mostly through the civil society.
But the government, a lot of governments on the continent, if you've been watching Transparency International, are so corrupt. How do you make sure that the aid that you give some of these countries reaches the intended targets, really?
And let me just say that one of the reasons why we do congressional delegations is to do that type of oversight. So when we do go to a country, we are looking at projects that are funded by the U.S. government and looking at whether or not those resources are going to the people that they're supposed to.
Well, you have less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's right. So it's some kind of smart aid, which you want to measure the objective at every point in time. How many people are being, how many kids below 5 years are being reached with nutrition, child nutrition programs? How many women are receiving family planning and all those kind of things? How many farmers are receiving new technology in order to boost their productivity? So I think the new paradigm of development aid is changing, and it is going in the right direction. And Africa should also do its own part by having responsible governments that are catering for their people and are also accountable to their people.
I see. Well, on that note, thanks to our distinguished guests, Congresswoman Karen Bass, who serves in the U.S. House of Representatives for the U.S. state of California, and Dr. Julius Agba from the Brookings Institution, a think tank based here in the nation's capital. Thanks to both of you and to our affiliate stations, along with our viewers and listeners. We thank you for tuning in. If you're listening to us on the Voice of America, Special English is coming up next. And tomorrow morning is Daybreak Africa with James Bate. Also, don't forget to tune into Voice of America's newest program, To the Continent, Africa 54, a 30-minute daily TV magazine program that features what's trending in news, health, sports, and lifestyle. On behalf of the Voice of America, thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Africa. In the meantime, get better, not bitter, please. And remember to keep the African hopes alive.